Good afternoon, LinkedIn friends, Value First Nation. Welcome to another episode of Value First Platform, talking about AI data readiness with Trisha Merriam. How you doing, Trisha?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. I'm excited about today's topic, um, which maybe a couple years ago, maybe last year, I would have never said such a thing about documentation. But here we are.
That was because it was so laborious to create, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Um, so, as you thought about this piece, um, and I think it's getting harder and harder to separate these different concepts out in terms of what it means to be ready for AI to help humans leverage AI. Um, Ultimately, getting to the place of how do we describe context and context architecture in a way that all of our humans and AI collaborators always have the context they need to take the next step. Um, is that a fair way to put it?
That's a fantastic way to put it. I have had the privilege of seeing what your Claude looks like uh, when you're building out a thing. And I think I I mean, number one, it's always fantastic to see what other people are doing and how they're doing it because it helps everything is so new right now. Every little bit helps you kind of understand and learn. But I think a lot of people would also just be uh, really amazed by how much documentation you feed Claude when you're building a thing.
Yeah, and it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and one of the reasons um, I enjoyed Claude and I gravitated that way is as soon as projects were available and I understood what they were, which was before I think so Anthropic went this route as opposed to custom GPTs, right? So custom GPTs were the thing where you can build like a new assistant, basically, um, add knowledge, add instructions, uh, but they didn't have projects yet. And what Anthropic brought was this project where at the time didn't have memory, but there was instructions and there was files, right? And as you could use and work with Claude to build documentation, it was one button click to add it to the knowledge base, right?
Mm.
So if we look at like what that means, as I'm working with him to write a book right now, which would never be close to possible. One, without AI, but two, without the documentation like foundation that's built up over the past like year and a half, right? And this is what I mean, where open this up and can copy it. We can add to project. We can download it and take it somewhere else. We can share it, right? But this add to project was huge in the beginning, and that allowed me to always save what I was doing. And in that experience, like learned about the importance of like overall context windows and um, like once you get up to 60-70% back then, your chats wouldn't go on for very long. And again, Anthropic was one that you'd hit the limits. And there was no scenario where like in ChatGPT and Google, you could just go forever in a chat, which I appreciated. And it's very much related to what we're talking about in terms of context, in that you could go on forever in these conversations with ChatGPT, but you could tell when it starts forgetting stuff. right? Whereas that moment never happened with Claude because you would get shut off, like you would hit the wall, which was frustrating in its own right. Um,
It but it's also I was just working on a project with ChatGPT, and it is also frustrating to, be like, did you forget that we've talked twice already about referencing this document when you get to this piece?"
yeah, yeah, and especially, and makes sense for the way that they work in terms of you'd upload a document today, and then if you come back to it in a couple days, is the document like still there? Sometimes it wouldn't be. Um, so I think in terms of documentation, like as AI works, like that's probably the favorite use of mine because it was such a weakness
Mhm,
of like project management and documenting what I'm doing so that other people like the communication that I need to do through documentation, right? And um, as we think about what's always lacking, always in terms of every messy HubSpot instance ever, like even the best HubSpot instances, data model design and documentation, process mapping, any documentation related to how things get done in a HubSpot portal is almost never where it should be, right? The only times it is, in my experience, is when there is some like ISO certification or
mhm,
some quality management system that requires documentation. And even there, it's more on the side of, operationally, the black and white stuff that makes sense to be documented and less about the customer behavior and our like marketing and sales processes because they're actually, really hard to document like exactly how it's going to work every time.
mhm,
And so that's something I latched onto immediately. And now I feel like I've gotten really good at spinning around, data models as you start to have one or two conversations about business goals and then how people work in HubSpot. And as an example of what's available now in this foundation you can build of just like if you're working on it with AI, it can immediately turn into documentation. Like you just have to ask it and then you decide on what that needs to look like for your organization, and for your team's context needs, right? So this is an example of a website page where we're showing like in process projects that we're working on, right? So all of this stuff exists as documentation, transcripts, data modeling, project management, documentation, uh, you know, architecture, um, any combination of like curated forms of those things, like plans, strategies, all that stuff. So then when I say, hey, Claude, can we make a page with all of our use cases on it? All of a sudden, that's an hour long activity. And when I think about AI data readiness, it's like, can you leverage AI to generate results like the quickest time to value that you've ever seen in your life? And that can only happen through the context layer, like being, um, accurate and trusted and available,
mhm.
right? And I'm working through a I'm working through a new framework uh, that just happened over the weekend, where um, uh, all I said to Claude, and I can actually show that here, because the global Claude. So I was just in a project based Claude, right? So I call this Claude global Claude that doesn't have a project. And
Mhm,
so all there is memory,
mhm,
right? And as I'm moving over the weekend, I get an idea, uh, like from my manufacturing background. and I was moving, and I'm like, okay, I need that thing. I need something, and now it's time to move it because I need it right now, right? So some other people might have had like a moving checklist and like all this plans done to make sure everything got moved. That's not never worked for me. So in this case, I need the thing. Now it's time to move the thing, right? I didn't think about it at all before that moment, so no energy was spent on that activity. So I come in and I say, just this is all I give Claude, right? Brand new chat, no project context. There's custom instructions and there's memory about how I think and what he knows about me, right? And gave me a very good answer that led to a very good conversation, which relates to if we can put all of our users, AI and humans, in a position where people trust these kinds of conversations, they trust the unified views that they're looking at. Uh, they don't like the preparation and the just in case, like planning and risk assessments and all these things that we've had to do to avoid, a lot of like human based, uh, gaps in our processes and our just inability to be everywhere all at once. Um, we don't have to do that stuff anymore in a lot of cases. And the kind of energy when I say things like AI data readiness, you try to pick out which parts of the process is going to support AI and which parts going to support humans. Like the parts where human judgment is required, like let's say getting the association labels right every time, like perfect, so that the automated emails and the notifications always go to the right person in every single circumstance, right? I would argue that that is a place where the human who in their brain, like that person has more context than anybody else about the relationships that are managed in that process, right? So don't ask AI to manage that part, right? Like is it a fleeting effort to try and get that data ready so that AI could manage it, right? I think the answer is yes, and that we should focus on other forms of data to get it ready for AI so that it can support all of these other things that we're usually worried about. And I'm curious if any use cases come to mind as I say that, so that when a human comes in and is looking at a unified customer view, they can be okay with just looking at the relationship data, right? And not the email address, is it spelled right? The phone number, is it formatted correctly? The city, state, zip code, like all of this stuff that is objective information that AI should be able to take care of, right? Is that like the way I'm kind of parsing it out? Is that resonating at all?
Uh, so I don't know if I'm following correctly, but I think what you were just saying is that out of the gate, the humans understand the relationships better. And so it's best to have the human being focused on the relationship and making sure that that is clearly communicated to AI.
Yes. And
That
so,
that's where the biggest value transfer can happen.
right. And that can, like, that lens should be applied to any data in the CRM. And the more that, and it should come from a place as easy, in my opinion, as like the less that humans can trust the data, the harder it's going to be to put the system in a place where AI can just come in and make the right decision on how to clean it up or how to leverage it. And like job titles as an example, right? If we know that our target market or our target audience gets creative with their job titles, like, let's say the HubSpot ecosystem, uh, or the word HubSpot in that example is ambiguous in what it may or may not mean to each different organization and each different team. That is a really tough spot to document in a way. And I'm finding this out with trying to document skills and agents and all these things to try and help my collaboration with AI get to a point where I can trust that he's always going to see HubSpot the way that I see HubSpot.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's where, if we come back to like continuing the documentation, right, these like data modeling, right, it's never been easier to start to put like um put this stuff on quote unquote paper, right?
Mm-hmm.
To where if you're bringing the transcripts in, and this could be like transcripts from internal meetings, right, about process and what happened last week versus this week, and like emails, like we have so much data to support getting to this documentation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now, like, this is an example of one data model, right? Where we look at key properties and all of the different objects, right? So I can now use this stuff to say, hey, Claude, um, I'm working on a new data model. Please look at this page, like before we like create the data model, right? Similarly, we need to be in a place as humans working internally to say, hey, this is what we're going to be talking about on our next internal enablement session. Or we show visuals during conversation. And then afterwards, it's much easier for people to use the context from the live conversation and come in and do the feedback that you asked them to do, because you have even the smallest of visual representations, right? Not having to go into Canva or Miro or these places that people aren't used to going into,
Mm-hmm.
creates another space for, I don't know how to use that thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now I got to go in there and figure out how to use it and try to understand this stuff that you're showing me and give meaningful feedback on it, right? Like even AI will struggle like in those moments, because there's just not enough context provided. Um, so all of this is to say it's never been easier to create documentation. And of course, I'll pull it up. That's what I see HubSpot trying to do, and doing a pretty good job at this point of trying to create these single views or these single panes of glass or these single surfaces where somebody like Bree's assistant can just look at the page,
Mm-hmm.
right, and have the context. So much of what I see happening in the updates, it can be easy when you think about it from this perspective to see like that update is just as much for Breeze as it is for like the humans,
Mm-hmm.
right? And just going to pull up one more thing. The reason I'm creating documentation outside as opposed to driving everybody like here, like HubSpot has, I don't know if they're up to 300,000 customers yet, but they have a huge like user base, right? That they have to support no matter what the product update is, they have to think about all of these different users and who's going to do what where. So I've been having a lot of success at doing things like this outside of the system where you might think, oh, it's just, we've got that stuff in HubSpot. We can see properties, like we can see associations. Like, why would we do that outside of the system? Right. And in a, like 2 years ago, 1 year ago, I might agree with you completely because it was a significant amount of work to create that documentation. Now it's super easy, and to the point where you can start having conversations with AI, screenshotting all these visuals and starting to get better and better documentation, like in play. The thing I haven't touched on yet is the definitions of everything, right? All these words, not leaving anything to chance, is a challenge. But ultimately, we've got to get to a place where the documentation acts as a governance like feature that says every time you see this deal pipeline with this deal stage, this is what it means. And every human understands that, and all AI support understands that without having to explain it during a conversation. If we are in a place where we are having to explain terms like that, we are having much less productive conversations. Right. And I think that's the layer here, that if you get the documentation right, and why I like to kind of match up human readiness is a lot like AI readiness, right? It enables everybody to start from a higher place to have much more meaningful conversations about insight and like strategic execution versus wondering what the dashboard means and like having all of our meetings about confirming is the data like clean and trustworthy, right?
Do you have an example where you can walk us through what the files are that you attached?
Um, what the files are?
Yeah,
Let me see.
because I think if you were going to build a data model, for example, like, I don't know, a pipeline, a data model, or something, I have some assumptions on what sort of documents that you'd put in there, but I have a feeling that you included even more. And that's because I would probably come up with, I don't know, between 5 and 7 documents, but I think you have more like 20.
It's yeah, this is like what context engineering looks like for sure.
Right. And
And like,
that's the interesting piece to me. It's like, what are you doing that's different?
all
And
right.
I think that there might be a gap there in terms of like, what is the context you see is the right amount of context versus what maybe is assumed.
I think everybody would have to try real hard to give too much context.
Hmm.
So like one of my least favorite exchanges with humans is when we're discussing a data model and we're discussing an integration and we're trying to figure out what data needs to flow. And I ask for an export from the other system or from HubSpot. And the response is, well, which data do you need? Like all of it. Uh, and that's where maybe there was a day where it's like, okay, if you give me like all your 1,000 properties, that's going to make it harder to go through the spreadsheet. Right. But we're no longer in that
Right.
world, right? AI can help us scale. So I'm trying to find a good example here. folder structure. All right. And you know what? I think HubSpot already does this structure, and we could probably be a little bit more intentional. Where when we think about how Breeze is set up, see if I can get there. All right. And this idea of agents, assistants, and knowledge vaults, and then CRM records, right? Like what things are needed for the human or the AI to do the thing that you need them to do. Like, I guarantee they need to understand the data model. I'll say it in its simplest form. When we do value first scoping activities, which is how, whether it's called that at the beginning or not, it's how we start every engagement. There is a session to cover business processes and business goals related to those processes. 90 minutes on that. And we try to be very non-specific to technology in that conversation, because that can drives way too much of the conversation usually. So session 2 is that technology conversation. What does our tech stack and capabilities look like as an organization? Session 3, with just those 2 sessions, a current state overview of what is the situation right now, anywhere from business processes, business goals, tech stack, all that stuff, right? And then future state data model based on the gap and implementation roadmap, right? Like, if you can't deliver those 3 things to wherever humans or AI are interacting with the system, it's very hard to know what the next step needs to be, except for the moments where you have to react to what's happening in front of you in that moment, right? Which is what most customer teams are in a position to do, right? They either have to respond to email notifications, form fills, like calls getting booked. And so I guess those 3 documents would come to mind at a bare minimum. And there's lots within those documents. But system architecture, how your humans use that system, now how AI is going to use that system, and who's responsible, like, for what, right? So I think we might need a part 2, because I think customer agent and the customer agent settings specifically are a perfect example of this. And I didn't think about it until I came over to Breeze.
Yeah.
But just the settings of, like, it makes so much sense. Like, if you want customer agent to be having conversations on your website on your behalf, it's a ready-made, like, documentation model of what it needs to be successful. So,
And really all of those Breeze agents are. So that's another, like, if you're trying to figure out what you need to get ready for and how you need to get ready, going into any of those agents where you want to have that kind of functionality, start by going into the agent and reading through the instructions
yes.
and what it wants from you.
Yeah.
And then start building out those things.
Yeah. Don't skip it. Right. Like,
Don't skip it.
I loved when the social media agent came out and you couldn't start using it until you put products and services information. It's like, of course, but we know that businesses don't have ICPs documented. They don't have a good grasp of their value propositions, like all that stuff. And that's where I point out very easily, like, yeah, all the gains that you're getting from AI, it's because you did all the work. Like, it's not replacing humans because humans couldn't do that. They didn't have the stuff they needed, like to do the work you're asking. So I think part 2 next week, we could talk about that customer agent as a specific use case. I think it'd be a really valuable conversation.
It sounds great.
Sound good?
Sounds great.
Until next time, everybody, have a great
All right.
week.
Thanks.
Thanks so
Thanks